Okay, we'll be continuing with Hilchot Shabbat in the 39 Mellachos by Rabbi Ribiat. We were in the middle of our discussion of Amira LeAkum. How, when, why, what are the laws governing our engagement with a non-Jew as to things that are forbidden for us to do or benefit from on Shabbos. And we talked about all the various categories. And we are now talking about when it's okay to use the services of a non-Jew to benefit from them on Shabbos. And we're going to talk about various arrangements, regular arrangements with employees, etc., that are meant to do work for us also during Shabbos. Okay, so I don't recall exactly if we mentioned this last time or not. We were talking, we're talking about when a non-Jew can do what is forbidden for us only midarabanan on Shabbos, not midaraisa, but midarabanan, pertaining to a mitzvah. If we have a mitzvah obligation that has to be done, and there are certain rabbinic restrictions, but it's not deraisa, it's not asur, so there are ways of intimating to a non-Jew that we can benefit from their service to prepare for the mitzvah, to enable the mitzvah to happen. Okay, one may remember we can't. Whatever. Let's talk about it. Okay, a non-Jew performing a shvus. Remember, shvus is the word used for isur derabanan, or rabbinic prohibition of Shabbos. A non-Jew performing a shvus for mitzvah purposes. One may also ask a non-Jew to perform an act which is only a rabbinic restriction for the sake of a mitzvah, even if it's not a public mitzvah need. Remember, we talked before, we mentioned that there's a difference between a public mitzvah and a private mitzvah. Meaning my personal obligation to have a Shabbat meal and I need the light on, I don't have lights on in my house, I can't really eat, and trying to get a non-Jew to turn on the light is different than, let's say, we need a minyan to daven in shul and the lights are off. Okay? This is based upon a concept known as shvus dishvus, which means a rabbinic restriction of a rabbinic restriction. Welcome to the wild world of halacha. Shvus dishvus refers to a halacha condition in which a rabbinically restricted act is twice removed to the third power on your mother's side. I'm sorry. Shvus dishvus refers to a halacha condition in which a rabbinically restricted act is twice removed from any midioraita transgression by two separate and distinct levels or layers of rabbinic ordinances. That was a mouthful. Okay, we're going to have to illustrate. Number one, asking a non-Jew to do a malacha, even a malacha midioraisa, is only a rabbinic ordinance. Meaning the Torah did not say that you can't ask a non-Jew to do, or you can't benefit from a non-Jew doing something for you on Shabbos. You didn't do it. The Torah seems to only be overtly concerned with you doing things, for you transgressing the things that you're not allowed to do. However, it's a foregone conclusion in the world that we live in that if one found the loophole of just having everything done through a goy, essentially Shabbos would be completely eroded. So the Torah left for the Chachamim to, based on their understanding of society and human nature, to extend the Torah in a way that it manifests that it is preserved. And therefore the Torah expects the Chachamim to apply rabbinic ordinances and prohibitions only to safeguard the nature of Shabbos. And therefore the Torah expected the Chachamim to asser us from asking, using a loophole, and instead of keeping Shabbos, just physically not being involved in the malacha. So what they did was they only extended these, meaning they made these prohibitions in a way that they have their own nature, in which they only extended them in certain circumstances. Meaning that the nature then of that level of halacha is only derabanan, and therefore it's like this. The Torah says you can't do X, Y, or Z. The Chachamim said, in order to not do X, Y, or Z, you also cannot do A, B, or C. Okay? Now, because A, B, or C is only on the level of the Chachamim, right? Therefore, it has its own rules, obviously, but also that the Chachamim qualified them. So, for example, they did not extend their prohibitions in situations where certain types of mitzvahs needed to be done. And therefore, the Chachamim never restricted Amir LeAkum in certain cases. Okay? So first of all, to understand that prime, our first level, right, of Amir LeAkum is an Isur Derabanan. That it's only, okay, don't be thrown off. The nature of it is a rabbinic prohibition. Therefore, okay, the restriction against asking the non-Jew is the first layer of rabbinic ordinance. And then you have number 2, where the Jew himself is only prohibited from performing the act by rabbinic ordinance. There is a second layer of rabbinic detachment as well. We have to see what that is in different cases. This is precisely what occurs when one asks a non-Jew to perform a rabbinic restriction. The act of asking the non-Jew is a rabbinic ordinance, it's a shvus, and the act of a non-Jew is itself only a shvus. Meaning, it's rabbinically prohibited to ask a non-Jew to do something for you, and it's also only rabbinically prohibited, a separate prohibition for you to directly benefit from a melacha that the non-Jew did for you.
It's like a fixed.
In that, there are 2 levels of the same thing that twice remove the thing, which qualitatively changes the situation. Right. Okay. So remember, the 2 separate prohibitions are, well, on the one hand, you can't ask a non-Jew to be an agent for you, and you cannot benefit, regardless of whether you dispatched him, you cannot benefit from what he does for you on Shabbos.
But both
those are separate. To ask somebody to benefit, right? So you're transgressing both those prohibitions normally, right? It happens to be, meaning you can't ask him, and even without asking him, you couldn't benefit. To ask him to benefit now, you're performing at least one. I'm thinking this through. Are you performing something? Yeah, you're asking him to do a rabbinic prohibition, but you're asking him to do you're not doing a dioraisa to ask him to do a not dioraisa. I think that's how we have to think about it. Let's see. The act of asking the non-Jew is a rabbinic ordinance, and the act of the non-Jew is itself only rabbinic ordinance. Hence, 2 layers of rabbinic ordinances separate the act from any Torah transgression. Yes. Right. So it's 2 steps removed from a dioraita. Okay? Meaning you have transgressed a rabbinic ordinance to ask somebody to do something for you. However, if you ask him to do something for you, I'm so lost here. Let's see what happens. Okay, we're getting in deep. This is because in the Alshech we discussed layers today. As a general rule, the shvus to shvus is permitted for the sake of a mitzvah. Okay, so
does that include
yes.
A negative mitzvah?
What's an example?
Like he does something so that you won't turn on a light on Shabbos. Like he disables the refrigerator. Right.
Can you put away can you turn off the fridge light?
So every time we open the refrigerator, the light doesn't go on or it doesn't beep for 25 hours.
Well, that's not a mitzvah, but I mean, you have an intent to keep God's Torah through that, but that's not a mitzvah. You're actually asking him to do an act that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos.
So that you want.
It doesn't matter, but you're asking him to do an act that you're not allowed to do. Right. So what is this case of mitzvah here? So we talked about, for example, we're going to mention, but the classic example is, a knife needs to be, a moel's kit that needs to be used as a bris on Shabbos. There's a mitzvah, there's a commandment to do a circumcision on the 8th day. And that means that even on Shabbos, right, ase docha lo sase, certain conditions have to be right for a positive commandment to push away a negative prohibition. The classic example is the Levirate marriage, right? One is forbidden to marry his brother's wife, no matter what, right? And yet, under certain circumstances, the Torah gives you a mitzvah that he has to, right? So here, a person has to do a circumcision. He has an obligation to do a circumcision for his son on the 8th day. When it's not on the 8th day, if it's not the 8th day anymore, he can't push off Shabbos. But since there's a special commandment on the 8th day, if it's on Shabbos, he needs, right? So now the moel is his agent. The moel is going to do the mitzvah for him, and he doesn't have. There's no eruv, and they have to get the moel's kit to the bris, to the baby. Okay, so you can dispatch a non-Jew. Okay, so that's the classic example. Okay, here, as a general rule, the shvus to shvus is permitted for the sake of a mitzvah. One may ask a non-Jew to bring a sefer through a private yard that has no eruv. Bringing the sefer in this manner is a shvus. Asking the non-Jew to do so is therefore a shvus to shvus. There are many other circumstances in which Amir LeAkum may be permitted. So that is not the Deoraisa commandment of Bris Milah. That's like, hey, maybe you can get some Torah learning in for before Mincha, Shabbos afternoon. So you see that is pretty lenient. There are many others. I'll tell you another example. You cannot ask a non-Jew to do anything directly, like tell him what to do. You have to talk to him in a certain way, because we've mentioned there's mitzvah chefetzecha v'daber davar. However, for example, pikuach nefesh, when it comes to loss of life or potential loss of life, all bets are off. It's not considered being mechal Shabbos. Now, if a person has a building which is on fire, and there's absolutely no possible pikuach nefesh, it's isolated, we know for a fact there's no humans in there, right? However, there's a Sefer Torah, or holy books that are written on parchment. You can tell a non-Jew directly, go put out the fire at so-and-so at this address immediately in order to save those things. And that's not a mitzvah. I don't know if that's an actual, a commandment, but that's an interesting, meaning we're going to talk about cases like that as they come up, to get a better handle on what's going on here in terms of Amir LeAkum. Okay. There are many other circumstances in which Amir LeAkum may be permitted. For example, to prevent a sudden monetary loss. That's the commandment, thou shalt not be poor. Or where the act is only a shvus, a prohibition of, meaning you can't ask a non-Jew directly to do something for you which is prohibited midaraita. Listen, you're building a building for me, I need you to work on it on Shabbos. Okay? So a shvus has its own rules. However, the law, meaning I forgot that this whole chapter, actually, this whole section is called Amir LeAkum vis-a-vis Isurei D'Rabbanan. Okay, so it works differently. However, the laws of Amir LeAkum are rather complex. And as with all areas of halacha, extrapolating halachos and acting upon superficial knowledge is an inducement to transgression. Kids, don't try this at home. Obviously, one must consult with a Rav before making a practical use of any leniencies not specifically mentioned here. Rabbis have very broad shoulders and are willing to take responsibility. Note, more examples of when Amir LeAkum can be permitted are discussed further in this section. Don't worry, folks. Non-Jewish employees, contractors, etc. on Shabbos. As we have seen, even simply benefiting from the malacha of a non-Jew is forbidden under the principles of Amir LeAkum. It is therefore quite understandable that questions of Amir LeAkum exist with numerous employment and business arrangements in which a non-Jew is employed to do work of some kind for a Jewish employer. And so, just think, shuls that have caretakers, schools, janitorial staff, kitchen staff, meaning all that kind of stuff. That's very common arrangements, at least in the States. In some cases, the arrangement is absolutely forbidden, whereas in others, an employment arrangement may be perfectly permissible, which includes also the work that he does over the course of a Shabbos. This depends upon the halachic nature of the business agreement, as shall be explained below. There are also situations where halachic restrictions unrelated to Amir LeAkum may prohibit a non-Jew's malacha activities. They may become a factor, sneakily. Examples of these shall also be cited further. Contractors and employees that are paid per hour. There are essentially two halachically relevant types of employee arrangements. There's something called kablanut, which means contractual agreements. And then there's schirut yom, which is a day worker, a day laborer, which means a per diem agreement. The definition in halacha of kablanut, the contractual agreement. Kablanos, as the Ashkenazim say, is the most lenient of the employee arrangements with respect to Amir LeAkum. The kablanos agreement need not involve an actual contract that is recorded on a document. Any arrangement whereby one agrees to work as a kablan is considered kablanut. A kablan is one who is contracted to supply a specific item or a defined service. It's not, meaning the time frame or the date that he does it on is not part of the arrangement. The fact that he chooses to do it on Shabbos has nothing to do with you. And since he's doing it for himself, because he's contractually obligated to fulfill something in order to get paid, it's not seen like he's doing it for you to directly benefit from. I'm imagining, I'm going ahead in my mind. Okay, let's see in the book. Okay, so kablanus is different from, remember, it's he's paid on commission or by the piece for the completed product and not for the hours he spent working. And it's different from the ordinary examples of Amir LeAkum because the kablan is not reacting to fulfill the request or direct needs of a Jewish neighbor or friend, but is merely working for himself to meet his own business goals. He is therefore not regarded as a shliach or an agent of the Jew. This point has important halachic ramifications that shall be illustrated further. Remember, we said one of the issues of asking, it's not receiving the benefit, but rather doing the work. Once you've dispatched him, he's an agent of yours. So in a way, it's kind of like you're doing it. So that's one issue. So we say over here, somebody's contractually obligated. He's not dispatched by you, so to speak, to do the work on Shabbos. Okay. The other issue is, remember, we talked about a non-Jewish maid, right, or a woman who, or a man who is, has like butler duties and lives in the house. If they heated water for themselves to make a tea or a coffee on Shabbos, and they left extra water in the kettle. So if it's clear that it's like an amount of water that way beyond what they needed for themselves, and it was done specifically for you to benefit from, you could not. Whereas if it was made for themselves and there was some left over, you could actually use that and benefit from it because the non-Jew did not do that melacha expressly for your benefit. Okay, so yes. Okay. Doesn't the action you indirectly ask the non-Jew to do on Shabbat also have to be for his benefit, not just for the Jew's benefit? So that's a little bit backwards, because you're not supposed to ask him directly to do anything for you. In fact, the problem is that you can only benefit, like I just mentioned right before the question, when he did it only for himself. But if he does it for you, you cannot benefit. Okay? So remember, if you look at the beginning of the laws of Amir LeAkum, we stated it's very important to know you cannot dispatch them, and you cannot ask them directly, and you cannot ask for things that only you will benefit from. That's why you probably have, meaning that's the question is framed in a common understanding of Amir LeAkum, which is really includes a lot of misnomers and is not mutar. So that's why it's very important to go to the beginning of this series and learn this up thoroughly, because Amir LeAkum is actually prohibited. Only under certain circumstances is it allowed, which is what we're discussing here. And remember, there were several issues. The main issues that we had for Amir LeAkum is, number one, shlichut, which we also just mentioned before the question, that you cannot dispatch somebody just because you're not doing it, but he's your agent, so that's a problem. Number two is you have the issues of midaber davar, which is, daber davar, or before that you have mimtzo cheftzecha, that you're making arrangements on Shabbos that you're prohibited of doing on Shabbos, even if you're not doing them yourself. Number two is daber davar, you're speaking of doing an act that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, therefore you can't tell him to do, right? You can't describe that act. And the third thing was that you cannot benefit from, the Chachamim prohibited you benefiting from an act that was done for your benefit by breaking Shabbos, meaning doing something that you're not allowed to do by a non-Jew. Okay, so now, Kablan is somebody who, since his arrangement has nothing to do, meaning it's about a finished service, and it's his goal to meet that end so that he could get paid, right? The laws of Amir LeAkum are very lenient, meaning they fit in much better. They're much easier to get around those four issues that we just mentioned. Okay? He is therefore not regarded as a shliach. There's no agency of the Jew because he's concerned for himself, and also because he's concerned for himself. Whatever work he does on Shabbos is not for the benefit of the non-Jew. Yet he is benefiting because it's for his goal. He's going to get paid. This point has important halachic ramifications, as shall be illustrated further. In this context, one can also distinguish between a kablan and a schir yom, that's somebody who gets paid by the day, a day laborer, right? Because the kablan is not paid for his time. He doesn't have to be at the beck and call of his employer during a period of time, but is paid only for a product, whether that product be an item or a service. An example would be a cabinet maker who is paid for a finished piece of furniture, a dry cleaner who is paid for a cleaned garment, an auto mechanic who is paid for a specific repair, and a typist who is paid per finished page. So if those people happen to be doing the work on Shabbos, that's not a problem for you. Although it is typical for a kablan to base his initial charge on his calculated labor time, It's not that time does not factor in for his calculations. You're not paying him for his time. That's his own considerations for how much he wants to be paid netto, which is your arrangement, right? I mean, he's not working for, you don't own his time. It's up to him how he allots his time to provide what you're getting for him, okay? So the Kabbalan's legal responsibility is only to supply a product, not to submit himself to the services of his employer for any length of time. He's factored in, it takes him 6 hours to make this drawer, right? The fact that now you're paying him according to that does not mean that you have him for 6 hours and you can ask him to do whatever you want for a block of 6 hours of time, okay? There's nothing to do, right? Okay, as such, he has a right to be paid in full regardless of how little time he may have actually spent. Just because he said 6 hours to come up with how much money he wants, if he does it in 2 hours or he spends an extra 8 hours, he's not going to charge you for the extra 2, and you still have to pay him for, for the finished product, whether he did it in less time. Good for him, he made more money, okay? Example, a cabinet maker who was contracted to produce a custom-designed chair for 500 smackers that was supposed to take 4 workdays to finish has the right to demand full payment even if it took him only 2 workdays to complete. Conversely, the customer is only responsible to pay the previously agreed sum for the product regardless of how many extra uncalculated hours the kablan might ultimately have had to spend producing the item. Right. A dry cleaning store may not charge a customer an extra fee if it had to spend more time and expense than usual to clean a particular garment that it had accepted as its regular fee. They may try to tell you, though, that A kablan is regarded as one who is working for himself, of his own accord. This is because the direct focus of his interest and his work is to satisfy his own production needs. He's not concerned with serving an employer's hourly needs or demands as the day laborer does. It follows that a non-Jewish kablan who produces an item for a Jewish customer on Shabbos is not acting as a shliach, but rather is acting solely on his own behalf. As stated earlier, one may benefit from the malacha of a non-Jew who performed the malacha for himself. Examples. One may send his car for repairs to a garage shortly before Shabbos, even though he knows the mechanic will do the work on Shabbos. However, he may not tell the mechanic to do the work on Shabbos, tell the mechanic that he must have the car immediately after Shabbos, whereby the work will have to be scheduled on Shabbos, because this is tantamount to telling the non-Jew to work on Shabbos. He may harbor hopes in his heart that the non-Jew will wait till Sunday, but if he doesn't, if he wants to work on his day off, what can the Jew do? He may not leave the car at the garage in a Jewish neighborhood where his car is recognized and people see his work being done on Shabbos, because they don't know what you said to the non-Jew, right? One may submit an agreement for 100 pages of typing to a non-Jewish typist who is being paid per page, even if he knows that she will do the work on Shabbos. However, he may not tell her to do the work on Shabbos. He may not tell her to have it ready right after Shabbos, knowing that this does not allot a reasonable time to finish without having to type on Shabbos. And if he knows the direct implications of his demands will necessitate labor on Shabbos that he's not allowed to perform himself, he can't do it. He has to leave it up to them, right?
Even if he doesn't ask them specifically, but he knows calculatively that that's the only way it can be done.
What do you mean?
Like
he can't demand that the end result is after Shabbos.
But he says, to get it on my deadline on Sunday.
That's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
That's the same thing. Yeah, he can't do that.
Right.
Okay? Meaning he can't say I need it immediately on Sunday.
This would all relate to like Amazon type situation, or warehouses in another country where you can't control their work. They're being paid by the hour, they could be Jewish.
Ay vey, ay vey, ay vey. That's the cry of the soul. Yeah. It's a wild world out there. This.
But you're not controlling. You're not telling them to.
It's interesting the idea of electricity and generators, all that kind of stuff. The grid, in Israel, all that kind of. These are issues. Okay. Even though the typist could theoretically exert him or herself to do the typing during weekend hours when people usually do not work, you didn't necessarily demand of them to work on their day off, right? So you can't have her do the work in his home or office where it's obvious that the work is being done for him. So that's another issue of Maras Ayin. Okay, one should not hire an out-of-town non-Jew to do work immediately after Shabbos, knowing that he will almost certainly have to drive during Shabbos to arrive on time. Okay, so that was all. We discussed a kablan, a contractual worker, meaning end result is the arrangement and not the time, and you have to do it in a way that you're not precluding him, or rather forcing him to work on Shabbos as a result of your arrangement with him, okay? So now we will get to schirut yom, a day labor. A schir yom is one who is employed as an hourly worker to fulfill specified or unspecified duties for his employer during his employment hours. Any such employees are considered on call during their workday to serve any spontaneous request of the employer and are acting completely on behalf of their employer. That day, meaning they are reserved as agents for their employer on call for the duration of that time. As such, a non-Jewish schir yom is considered an agent of his employer and is not permitted to do any malacha at all on his behalf, even without being requested to do so, because it's understood that everything he's doing then is for you. This includes malacha activities that do not produce any positive benefit. We said before one of the distinctions was that you can have somebody turn on, right, whether the act that he's doing is that, right, turning off the AC and saving you money is not, turning off your lights that you left on in the car is not a positive benefit. That's not earning you money, that's saving you money. Okay, so even that is asur for somebody who's being paid as a day laborer. The reason is that because a schir yom is viewed as one who's subject to a perpetual standing request to do malacha during the hours of his employment. As stated earlier, it is forbidden to request a non-Jew to perform any malacha, even if no benefit is derived from that malacha. Meaning, that's not the problem. Remember, we have the front end and the back end. The front end is you can't dispatch somebody to do anything for you, even that is forbidden for you, even if you do not derive benefit, because he's your agent. Meaning it's like you're doing it. On the other hand, even if you didn't dispatch him, you can have benefit from somebody who did an act that you were prohibited for doing on Shabbos. Okay? That's the front end and the back end. Amira LeAkum includes both those sides. But since here we are reiterating that you can have somebody doing something for you even if you don't benefit from it if it's a malacha on Shabbos. An office secretary is hired by the hour for the purpose of typing and various other office duties. He or she therefore assumes the status of a day laborer who is functioning directly on behalf of her employer. A non-Jewish office secretary may not take home extra overtime typing work for his or her Jewish employer because any work he or she performs on Shabbos will be halachically regarded as being done at the request of her employer. A non-Jewish custodian in a yeshiva or a shul. If the janitor or custodian of an institution is hired for any and all maintenance duties, any malacha that he performs could be regarded as part of his hired and therefore instructed responsibilities. It would therefore be forbidden to even allow him to do any malacha activities, like shutting the lights, heat, air conditioning, etc., on Shabbos, though we noted that that wouldn't necessarily give you a positive benefit, like we said. However, the yeshiva or shul could specify beforehand that the custodian's responsibilities on Shabbos are limited to non-malacha activities only, like washing the floors, the dishes, cleaning tables. Under this arrangement, the janitor would be no different from any other non-Jew who may do a malacha as long as there is no request and no positive benefit from the malacha. Meaning he could do stuff from his own accord, just the conditions of his services that he's providing them, they have an arrangement that excludes those. Okay? A live-in maid or domestic cleaning person. A domestic help retains the halachic status of a schir yom because she or he is paid as an hourly worker who must fulfill an unspecified number and variety of duties for their employer during the time of their employment. As such, any malacha performed by a hired domestic help is considered as shlichut on behalf of the employer and family, as though there was a standing request to do malacha, meaning they're effectively agents. Accordingly, a domestic is not allowed to perform any malacha at all for the sake of the family, even without any hinting, and even where no hana'ah or positive benefit is produced. One may not allow the domestic to shut a light, turn off a noisy alarm, lower a flame, even though one may allow another non-Jew to do these things. Meaning this is all because it's the problem of shlichut. There's no problem with, having a non-Jew do these things. The problem is having the non-Jew who happens to be your domestic help doing these things, because then they're for sure doing it as your agent, and that's like you're doing them, right? So in their example, we had domestic that heated up water for themselves, right? So if, like we said, that's something they did for themselves. They're not doing it as an agent for you. That's why in that case it would be okay, because they didn't do it specifically for you. They did it for themselves, and there's some left over, and they're not your agent to do something for themselves. Okay? Despite these restrictions, families who are well acquainted with the basic halachas of Amira LeAkum can indeed benefit to some degree from domestic help on Shabbos in a permissible fashion. One may allow the domestic to fold, but not wash the laundry, wash dishes, clean tables, tidy up, not vacuum the house, etc., even if she is doing so for after Shabbos. This is permitted because he or she is doing this on their own initiative to have a head start on their work week. These cases are allowed because the non-Jew is not doing any actual malacha on behalf of their employer. Remember, it's a rabbinic prohibition, if there is one, meaning the cases where it's allowed, and you're not asking them, and they're doing it for themselves.
That seems a bit contradictory. You're saying that live-in help is paid by the hour, and therefore is your
that way you can't. Meaning it's as if they're always instructed, right?
Right. So why would it be any different for folding as opposed to
because remember, the problem of Amira LeAkum is not meaning when you have somebody. When you get benefit from them in a way that you don't dispatch from them under certain conditions, it's okay. The issue here is not benefit, the issue is shlichut. When we're talking about these arrangements, we're talking about the problem is that when they're doing something, they're doing it as your agent, okay? So, okay, so one more time. These are all basic questions coming up that it's like people are just tuning into the issue of Amir LeAkum. Now, there are 4 issues with instructing a non-Jew to do a malacha for you on Shabbos. The first basic one is that just because somebody else physically is doing it, if they're doing it because you instructed them, they are your agent, and it is as if you're doing it yourself. Okay? On the other end, even if you don't instruct them and you don't have the issue of agency, there are laws of whether you can benefit or not, even if they did not do it in a way that it's as if you did it. They did it independently. So there's the front end of the act, right? The dispatching the issues, and there's the back end, meaning if there's no dispatch issues, there's the benefit issues. Okay? So 1 second. Shlomo asked, why folding and not washing? So, this may take a moment, but maybe it's worthwhile. In the back of the book is all the Hebrew sources from contemporary halacha that discuss these issues. Note 313, and this is section 1. Let's see what we got here. Let's see if there's anything relevant here. .313. Okay. Kipul begadim ein ba melacha zulat keshemekaplim al kipulim harishonim v'ayin lekaman. Okay, so folding laundry by itself is not really an issue on Shabbos. It's not a malacha. The only issue why people don't fold, like some people are makpid to not fold their talitot on their pleats or on their folds, because some people consider that part of the malacha of milaben, which is to scour or to clean or to freshen laundry, and therefore it's seen as sprucing up the laundry. But so that's only that's only an issue if it's done in that fashion. But here, the act of folding laundry itself is not also on Shabbos. Certainly, if you may need it for later on Shabbos and it's not preparing. And he says, look further at note 314, hadachat kelim v'shar nikoi habayit, cleaning washing dishes and cleaning around the house, let behu mishum malacha, that is not forbidden on Shabbos because of malacha, klal, at all. Ulechein mutar, and therefore it is totally acceptable, l'shivcha, for a domestic help, la'asot dvarim, elu, to do these things, b'shvil Yisrael, for a Jew, afilu al yedei tzivoy ha-Yisrael, even when directly asked or instructed by the Jew.
I thought you couldn't even wash dishes if it's not needed again for Shabbat.
You personally.
Yeah.
But obviously we're talking about in a situation where you can, the non-Jew can do it for you.
Uh-huh. So
here's the question. The question is, meaning, no. Here, if you're permitted, they certainly can. The issue is here where you're not permitted. Meaning, let's say you don't need that, right? Why is it, okay, now on a regular day, right, when you're done with dishes, you put them away for next time. Right? So why, meaning it's part of straightening up the house.
Yeah.
Their job is to straighten up the house. They can't do things that are malacha for you on Shabbos because they are skir yom. But the things that are not directly malacha, that you're not asking them to do, there's no problem that it would seem. Now, there is a lengthy, the rest of the page is devoted to the intricacies of this, and half of the next page in small print. And, there's a whole discussion here from various sources, and maybe if you want to give me homework, I could prepare for next time, and we could do this inside. But it's really, really important, right? Right now, just to try to get the basics. These are important basic questions. But I'm gonna let's finish this section, and maybe we'll be able to elucidate next.
But the basic is that if you're allowed to do it, then your domestic help.
Oh, for sure, right.
And if you're not allowed to do it, there are certain circumstances where domestic help can do it.
Exactly. Yes, of their own accord, right? Meaning, let's say she wants to come in on Shabbos and do stuff for Sunday. You didn't tell her to do that. Now you have clean dishes, you can use them on Shabbos. Give her extra work.
Then she's not really paid by the hour.
Indeed.
That's the problem.
Right, so we said, okay, one may allow the domestic to wash dishes, clean tables, tidy up, not vacuum the house, even if she's doing so for after Shabbos, on Shabbos. Let's say she knows you're going to have a dinner party on, you're going to have a birthday party on Sunday, and in the afternoon in the West Wing, and the conference room, on your palatial estate needs, balloons put up and everything and all that. Well, that might be malacha deraisa, but like sweeping the floor and getting the table, putting the chair, all that stuff, that you don't need that till Sunday. She's doing it for you on Shabbos. But she's not doing that for you to benefit on Shabbos. That's her concern that she did on Shabbos.
So why is she allowed to not allowed to hoover, to vacuum?
Because that's a malacha deraisa.
Because of the electricity?
I guess so, yeah. Meaning she's only allowed to do things that are not. Remember, this is shvus to shvus, right? This is a rabbinic on a rabbinic.
But really, it questions the whole thing about whether domestic help is a paid laborer for the hour or a contractor.
In that case, meaning what rests in the balance there is overt malacha. And overt malacha is certainly forbidden because everything they're doing for you. Meaning, that's shlichut. That's the problem with shlichut. So now, doing things that are only isur derabanan, you can't do them according to the Torah, but according to Rabbanan, since a non-Jew is doing them for you, it's okay. As long as you don't dispatch them, and then it's not the issue of shlichut. Okay? Mm-hmm. All right. I think that's the formula. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if you don't directly tell them, and it's not an issue of shlichut, of agency, then they can do acts derabanan, not deraita, but derabanan that you wouldn't do, that you couldn't do, and you may benefit from them. Okay? Asking a domestic to perform non-malacha chores that may involve a malacha. In some instances, one may even ask the domestic to do a non-malacha chore that may indirectly involve a malacha activity. Oh boy, this is getting complicated. Examples. Number one may ask the cleaning lady to wash dishes that are needed on Shabbos, even though it could be expected that she will use the hot tap water, which is an issue of bishul, because you can't use water that was heated up on Shabbos. A sponge or dishcloth, which is the issue of schita, of wringing out, extraction, which is a tolda of dash. We'll get there, right? For her personal convenience. I mean, you never told her how she has to do her job. You told her she has got to do her job. And she's going, it's a lot easier. Meaning when you do it on Shabbos, you got to use some sort of Shabbos sponge, and you got to use cold water, and you got it, right? But she's going to use hot water, and she's going to use a dish rack, and she's going to get it done.
For her benefit,
right.
Not for yours.
Exactly. For her personal convenience. So you didn't ask her, it's a non-malach chore. It may indirectly involve a malach activity, but she is not your agent for that, and that has, you're not, right? And the fact that you benefited through that, you didn't benefit of that, she did. Instead of using cold water or hot water from the urn that you already heated, right? So that's totally cool. One may ask, using hot water is totally cool. One may ask a cleaning lady to wipe up a spill, even though she will probably use a wet mop, which is an issue of wringing, of schita, for her own convenience. Meaning, if you did it, you would have to do it in a way that, that's allowed. It's possible in a way that's allowed. The fact that she's going to do something that is not allowed for you, right? That's fine. How are we doing for time?
Really, whenever you want to swap over.
Okay. I would like to wish you all a fantastic Chag Sameach. It's Zman Chag Simchasenu, or Zman Simchatenu, and it's finally we can have a joyous period of the year after we've been completely cleaned by Yom Kippur with a special intimacy with Hashem. And I'm wishing you all Ruach HaKodesh on this coming holiday season. And with that, I'd like to pass you all over to my friend Judah Lazarus.
Go ahead.